Peace and light, that old guy Australia, coming to you from the far south coast. A little wet this morning, rained overnight, and I was going to get out and do a video on the beach there. However, it's quite wet, and there's a bit of sea running and it makes a bit of noise, and I think this video is too important to muck around with. So like, share, subscribe, hit the notification button, you'll know when I'm doing a video, and YouTube and Instagram you can find me. Okay, so today is a subject that I want to touch on, and I'm going to have to preempt a little, and you have to bear with me on that, and please just continue on, but just bear with my preempt, if you will. I don't do these videos to garner some kind of sympathy from people, and I have some people who've known me most of my life on the coast down here, and they will probably look at these videos and laugh and think it's pretty funny, really. And I'm well aware that there's a lot of mocking going on behind the scenes. I won't say it to my face, of course. That's just not what people do. They'd rather speak about you badly behind your back. The problem is, with that, it doesn't bother me. You know, the world is in such a chaotic state, and we're facing what will be the end of the world, in a sense, in such an ugly way that I haven't got time. Those people and their views are superfluous, and they have no bearing on the end of what's happening here. They've got no information, no insight, no education on what's going on, and no desire to know. They're just ignorant to that point. G'day, mate. Sorry, getting messages there. So, please understand I don't do these videos for glory, because there's not many. I've only got less than 500 subscribers, and I don't do them for any kind of sympathy. So those kind of comments, don't worry about it. If I share personal information like I'm going to today, then really I do it to give you a sense of not only who I am, but what's going on in the world and what's been going on and will continue to go on unless people stand up. Now, the topic today, unfortunately, is one that most people gravitate away from. People don't want to talk about, and I'll get into why as we go on with the video. But this is really about sexual abuse, particularly for children. And it is a really ugly subject. I admit that, I understand that, and I know a lot of people don't want to, get into it, and I'd be lucky to get 20 people watch this, because it's just, people just go, oh, don't want to watch that, don't want to watch that. But that's how it goes. We've got a situation in the world facing humanity that's not being exposed. It is very, very, very slightly, and it's continuing to be exposed in some ways, but not, in my opinion, quick enough. But I do understand that the end will come. It will be all exposed. It's quite interesting that people think that because our history has been truly and truly perverted, what we've been taught in school and read in history books is just absolute lie after lie after lie. It's so much bullshit you wouldn't believe. It's just the falseness of that history is ridiculous, and I've never come to understand that until the last 3 to 5 years, of just how much we've been led down a garden path. But one thing about the history is that there's always been child sexual trafficking, there's always been pedophilia, and there's always been child sacrifice. It's just never stopped. It's always been going on, and people, when they think about it today, they think that we're some kind of civilized countries, that this stuff doesn't take place. And that was for the Middle Ages, Dark Ages, cultures that were, barbaric, and had no real formation basis. A little, you look at the cities that the Incas and the Aztecs built, and you have to start to think about wondering, how they could have such massive civilizations and still be involved in this kind of satanic, ritualistic abuse of children. Those who think that this has just gone away and stopped entirely, I feel sorry for you in one sense, because it's never happened. In history, it's never happened. It's continued right through, and it continues on today. The only difference today is we have ways and means of hiding it, and we have far more people involved around the world, far more powerful people who are willing to spend billions and billions of dollars to ensure this never comes out. But it is coming out. And child sexual abuse is something that is very dear to my heart. I had suffered abuse as a child myself. I'll just give you an indication, and I'm not going to go into any great detail, but I was adopted by a family here in the South Coast. Very upstanding community people, played golf and went fishing and went to the pub and everything else. Workers and all that kind of stuff. Yet the mother of that family was the first one to abuse me when I was just 4 years old. I'd only just been adopted down here. I hadn't been down here very, very long, and my brother was at school, in primary school, and I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something. Despite the fact that the pain is not there, the memory never goes away. And this is the thing about child sexual abuse. You can never, ever, ever take it out of your mind. It's there forever and a day. It's indelibly stamped in your head. And even though I'm telling you this, I can actually watch the video in my head. So I'm going to tell you this, and I apologise. For some of you, you may find this a little hard to deal with. For others, you might think it's funny. I don't know. People are strange like that. I've got to put a window down. It's a little bit in the hot side. Right. So I remember being 4 years old. I know that because my brother was at school and I wasn't at primary school. And I was at home now. I have no idea why. Why I was in trouble, I have got no idea. I don't know. But we had an external laundry toilet, so it was in a separate building away from the house. And I can clearly see and remember my mother, or my adopted mother, taking me to the laundry. Now, I was crying, and I remember I was sobbing, but I don't know why or what the situation was, but she ordered me to come to the laundry, and I did. And in the laundry, she had some tubs, those big tubs, and a cake of Sunlight soap. And she brought with her a glass, and she filled it up with tap water and gave it to me and said, "Drink this." And so between sobs, I drank it, with her ordering me to keep drinking. And she filled the glass up again and gave it to me and said, "Drink the water," ordering me to drink it. And I, of course, kept drinking it. I don't recall why I would question that, and I didn't. I just began drinking it, and she kept saying, "Drink it, finish it, you got to finish it," and I kept doing it. And she got the cake of Sunlight soap and put it under the water, and she produced a heap of suds. Then she ordered me to drop my pants, which I did. And she took my penis and she squeezed it so that the end, the small hole in the end, opened up, so it was round, and she got the suds from the soap and she rubbed it into the hole and began rubbing it into the hole of my penis. Now, that in itself hurt, but she hung on pretty freaking tight, and I was screaming then. I remember screaming, but she wouldn't let go. I went down to the floor, she went down, she kept rubbing this soap in there, and then as quickly as it started, it stopped. She got up, washed her hands. I was still screaming, and she got up and walked back into the house, and the back of the house had three sides of the room were all glass. So she went back in and sat at the table. Now, I was pretty bewildered as a kid. I had no idea what the hell had just transpired, no idea what had taken place. But my mother was no longer there, and I was alone in the laundry. So I went outside. I had no idea what had just taken place. And, you know, I kind of was under no instruction from her because she'd gone inside. So I kind of wandered around, still crying, unsure. My penis was still hurting, but I didn't know what was going on. I had no idea. But, of course, there came a point in the not-too-distant future where I had no choice but to urinate. And I had to have a piss, basically. And so I went to the laundry, because that's where the toilet was, and I lifted the lid up, and I went to have a pee. And, well, honest to God, I cannot tell you. Some men will know the pain, but as a young 4-year-old boy, I had never experienced pain like that in my life. The hot uric acid coming from your penis hit the sudsy soap on the inside of the penis, very sensitive area, and it burnt, just like scalding hot. Burnt. I screamed. I urinated on the floor. I fell over. I was trying to stop urinating, and it was just killing me. And of course, I just urinated everywhere. The thing about that is, and there's two things about that, really, I guess. How on earth that woman knew to do such a thing. Where on earth she got the idea from? It just, I've never understood where on earth she came up with that punishment. It's just, I mean, who the hell gave you that information, taught you that was somehow, God, I don't know. And of course, right until the day that she died, though I had some contact with her over the years, even though I was taken out of that home when I was 12 years old, when her brother found out about the abuse that was going on down there, the severity of the beatings, the emotional abuse, the sexual abuse that was taking place with my brother and my mother, he took me out of that home and put me with a family in town. I could not do that today, as I've said before, but they did it then. And I finished my schooling living with another family, and I never went back to that house. It was horrendous. I love the words that Billy Connolly said, because Billy Connolly himself was adopted, and he said, and was abused by his auntie. And he was doing an interview, and he said, I cannot understand how somebody can adopt a person for 5 minutes and then abuse them for 20 years. And that's, I relate to that so much. I have mixed memories of my growing up. But one thing that's always stuck in my head is that abuse. I can never get that out of my head. I've gotten over it, I've dealt with it, but I can never, ever, ever get it out of my head. It will never go away. And then I think about how so many others, particularly other young children, have suffered some of the most horrendous sexual abuse that you could possibly imagine. And my heart grieves. I don't know how they would deal with that kind of thing. I know a lot of them over the years, many have committed suicide, etc., or gone on to some pretty bad lives, and others have recovered. But how they deal with that kind of abuse, I have no idea. I have no idea. So when we have a commission into sexual abuse within the church, and it becomes exposed, and while the man who's in charge of that commission, who's been put in charge of that commission because he's a bit of a klutz, and they knew they could control him, when that man went down the rabbit hole and began to find information and evidence that was getting his investigators and his teams to go further and further and further, our current government of the time, under a Christian Prime Minister called John Howard, who's recognised, and you can read it anywhere you want to Google it, as one of Australia's most popular and most loved and respected Prime Ministers, having served so many terms. Yet that same man found out about this information that the Commission had discovered. And the Commissioner had this, Mr. Woods had this information. And he was horrified, called Woods into the office, and they had a round table discussion. Woods laid out the information that he had discovered and outlined where he would be going with that information in further investigations. And this involved high-ranking people within the community. It involved a Prime Minister. It involved current and former serving politicians, some of whom are still in politics to this day. Now, this also involved police commissioners and high-ranking members of the legal fraternity, barristers, judges, magistrates, you name it. So when he found out about this, right, he was absolutely horrified. So he said to Woods, no, you've got to stop. We can't have you going any further with this. You can't investigate any further. You'll just have to stop. We can't have the public lose faith in our judicial system. Now, Woods had a list of 28 names. Hence my T-shirts that I've got coming, which has got Name the 28. Now, these names were known in police records in police files as being pedophiles. And that Christian Prime Minister slapped a 90-year suppression order on those findings and ordered Woods to stop investigating down those rabbit holes, which he did. Now, let's go back about 5 years ago. We began talking about, more openly, the pedophile ring that operates in Hollywood. Now, you would know that there have been so many people, whether it be Anthony Bourdain or Cappy and many, many others, who've been involved in producing and investigating links to child sex trafficking within the Hollywood elite. And this goes back to things like the Lolita Express, Epstein Island, the Sex Island, the pedophile parties that were held out there, the flights on Lolita Express, you know, Bill Clinton going out there 22 times, all this kind of stuff. The man who ran that, finding himself in a maximum security prison, alone in a cell, the cameras were turned off, and conveniently hung himself, despite the coroner finding that the injuries caused by his death were not to do with hanging, but that he'd been strangled. So, the diaries, we know all this. It's just everything has been suppressed and suppressed and suppressed, because behind all this is evil, and behind all this are billions of dollars, and behind all this are some of the world's most wealthy people, leaders of the world from countries all around the place, Saudi Arabian princes, prime ministers, you know, you name it, from all over the world, major company leaders, the whole thing. And they're involved in this child sexual ring. And that involves child sexual trafficking and sacrifice, ritual sacrifice. This involves some of the most sadistic and evil sexual exploitation of children you could ever imagine. Whatever you can think in your head, they've done it and worse. Everything in the world, as far as I'm concerned, and I could be the only one to think this, is simply a distraction. I don't care what it is. Every single thing in this world is a distraction. Every war, every political event, everything that's going on is a distraction, because there's really just one thing they want to keep hidden, and that is this ritualistic sexual abuse and slaughter of children right around the world. And this is such a highly organised thing. And we know now that it's the head of the serpent is based in Ukraine. It's just, certainly for Europe anyway, the trafficking through Europe, it's just horrendous. That's why they don't want this information coming out. That's why they want to keep a war going there. That's why they want to keep you distracted with a bug and all sorts of things. That's why Klaus Schwab said he had to bring Agenda 2030 forward. Antonio Guterres from UN agreed with him and said, yes, we're going to push this forward. We're going to make it come forward quickly. The evil behind this is something that is pervasive in our society. I personally can't think of a more heinous crime. The robbing of an innocent life, the destruction of an innocent life, all for the pleasure of somebody else. It's just horrendous. So what my mother did to me, she got a kick out of, because everybody gets something out of something. I left home, and I have never understood fully the damage that transpired. I once described it in one of my videos, if you go way back. I said I was like a satellite circling with nowhere to land, and that's really what it was. I was absolutely lost. I found out I was adopted. The abuse suddenly made sense, and it became the most critical point of my life. I began a quest of the lust of the flesh. I got into girls. I was into women, like you can believe, and it's a bit better looking than I am now. That's not even funny. But and drugs and alcohol became my panacea. But I I was being urged and ushered towards something. Because I didn't want to go down with the ship. I had to somehow find a way to survive, to get above, to rise above, to get out of where I'd found myself. And it was just, I cannot even tell the people I grew up with, and some of them are watching this, I cannot even tell them what I had to go through, what the fight that I had on my hands, both mentally and spiritually and emotionally. It was just, the fight was horrendous, no matter what face I put on. And I did some of the most horrendous shit when I was a young guy. Nothing at all that I'm proud of. I didn't care. I had lost my entire moral compass. I was absolutely destroyed. And that was just me with that one situation. That's what it did to me. It took me another 50 years to even get on top of that. That's what the abuse does. And I haven't even, and will never tell you, the extent and the depth of the deprivation that even I suffered out there. Because people don't necessarily want to know it, and most people won't believe it anyway. But they just think you're making shit up. Hey, she's dead, she can't defend herself. Well, you might want to know that I confronted her when she was alive and sat down and asked her why. And she had no answers and said she wouldn't discuss it, didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to know about it. Hands off. But I found out, I knew she wanted a daughter, and they'd already adopted a son. And she wanted a daughter, and her and my adopted father fought and were going to separate. And then my uncle from Sydney came down and convinced her to acquiesce and get another boy. And that was me. So before they'd even left to go to Sydney, to Dalmar in Carlingford to pick me up, before they'd even left, she had burning hatred for me. Didn't matter who it was. Burning hatred. So we've got a situation now with a company called Balenciaga. And Balenciaga has been brought into the spotlight more than it wanted to, and mainstream media is doing everything it can to keep this out of the news, but it's being forced to cover it in some ways, in some areas, where Balenciaga has just put out a fashion shoot for children, and it involves several photos that are heavily BDSM, sadomasochism, bondage. Oh, God. The outfits these kids are wearing are just horrendous. They're so obviously sexual, they're shocking when you look at them. Now, Hollywood is being pressured to come up with a voice for this. Kim Kardashian came out and said she was horrified and shocked by what she'd seen. But even her, she's refused to distance herself from Balenciaga. Nicole Kidman, an Australian actress whose father, as you would know, went overseas when he was accused of pedophilia and suffered a fall and died overseas. But he and Nicole were mentioned in a radio interview with Karen Kingston. If you've never heard it, then you can take it for what you will if you have heard it. But they were mentioned in that, where they were part of an operation here in Australia, be careful what I say, allegedly by Karen Kingston, where she was attending, where there was child abuse and ritual sacrifice. And the police know about the pedophile brothel that was operating in King's Cross for many, many years. And it's mentioned in that video. Police knew about it. They knew about the barristers attended. They knew about what was going on there, and they were told to turn a blind eye. And that's not some kind of assumption. That's actual fact. But Balenciaga is now under the spotlight. We've had more Hollywood stars come out and make accusations against Hollywood and the pedophile ring that's operating there, and it's been massive. And we know the list of celebrities who were on the Lolita Express, who went to the parties at Epstein's Island, where they held some of the most horrendous depraved, evil, sadistic parties ever. And of course, Epstein filmed them unknowingly and unwittingly. He filmed them all and put himself in the spotlight. Ghislaine Maxwell got hold of those videos. The FBI has them now, thousands and thousands of them, and they were his assurity that he would live. But once they got the videos, he died in jail. End of story. See you later. They didn't need him. They can get rid of him. Ghislaine, of course, has been put in a minimum security where she's doing yoga. But her diaries have not been released, which is the most unusual thing you'll ever see. Even Joe Rogan did a huge segment on it. That you would have a woman who sold children to celebrities and major world leaders, and yet none of the names are released because the FBI is so corrupt as well. Here in Australia, we have current serving politicians who are known in police files as pedophiles. I implore you to do something about this. Write to your local member, I was recently on Tanya Davies' page, MP for Mulgoa in Sydney, and I was accused of bullying by one person who said that I was bullying her because I said you did nothing. You've been in politics for over 10 years, your husband was a Mayor of Penrith, and you did nothing. You could have, why didn't you confront these politicians, Morrison? Why didn't you confront any of these prime ministers that we've had? You know, whether it be Rudd or Gillard or whoever. Why didn't you confront them and demand that they overturn that suppression order? And how come you never addressed the issue of pedophiles in the Australian Parliament? These are people who are taxpayer funded, who are currently serving in politics in Australia, and they're known by police as pedophiles. I'm shocked that nobody's doing anything about this. There's like this push to normalise and legalise child sexual rape. Now we know that they've just passed laws in California, where else, which allow the rape of children to take place, and they don't have to be reported. We know that the Greens here for years have pushed for the age of consent to be lowered to 13. We know that they've been even TED Talks with seminars on the affinity of older people to younger children as a form of normal sexual persuasion. It's just horrendous. And this is where they want to go. Because if they can get that over the line and get that legalised, then all this can then come out, and there's nothing they can do. They'll just go, oh, well, we now recognise that as a normal sexual persuasion, and it's not an issue anymore. But we have to make it an issue before it becomes a bloody non-issue. I'm not anybody, and I didn't go through half of what these people went through. I assure you, I didn't go through 100th of what they went through. Yet I'm living proof and living testimony of the damage it did to me. And if you think that kind of damage is okay, like that guy who said that I was bullying Tanya Davies for insisting that she approach the Prime Minister and demand that he remove that suppression order from the Woods Commission report, then that's the kind of woke left thinking that will end up not only covering this shit up, but allowing it to be legalised and become normal. We can't allow that to happen. I'm telling you, we cannot allow that to happen. I know it's an ugly subject. I'm well aware it's an ugly subject. I started out saying it was an ugly subject. But you can't just ignore it because you're uncomfortable about it. You can't just say, well, there's nothing I can do. Said 4 billion people. You can't do that. These children are demanding a voice. If there's Brumbies being shot, you're all up in arms and signing petitions and God knows what. Yeah, we're talking about children, living human beings who are being raped, sold, sacrificed. You would have seen Project Veritas has just been allowed back on Twitter, and one of their first ones was to involve Joe Biden, the President of the United States, in sex trafficking, human trafficking, and they're going after him big time. They've already been interviewing some of these people who have been brought across the border, and they're sold basically into slavery, and part of that slavery, for a number of them, is sexual gratification of older people. And they have to work and earn their money to pay off this debt that they've supposedly accumulated by getting a better life. It's sick and depraved. And we know that's the evil. I've told you all along, it's all about the children. It's all about the children. Everything else is just smoke and mirrors and distraction. Everything else is smoke, mirrors, distraction. It is all about the children. When the depth of this depravity becomes public knowledge, some of you will drop dead on the spot from the shock and horror. We already know, as I've mentioned previously, and it was been exposed, that there's a particular ingredient in food that shouldn't be there. That's actually legally used in many, many countries right around the world, despite many food companies, major food companies, saying they don't use it. It's been relabeled and they've found it and it's been exposed. And that has a human element to it. Oh, God. This is a pure fight against good and evil. That's all it is. And every single part of this is to remove humanity from humanity. Control our DNA, change us from what God gave us and created us to be. Change us structurally, internally, and control us so that no amount of godliness can have any say in our lives. It's so depraved. I lack the English words for it. I know it's a heavy subject, and I thank you for listening if you have. Like I said, I'm probably lucky to get 10 views of this because it's such a horrible subject. But there's nothing else I can say. If you don't acknowledge it and you just ignore it because it's irk and yucky, then this continues every single minute. While I've done this video, probably 50 kids around the world, 100 kids around the world, 1,000 kids around the world have been sexually abused and killed. This is massive. And it's happening here in Australia on a grand major scale. You've got to acknowledge it. You can't turn your back on it. These children need you. They need a voice, and we're the only voice they got. And we're fighting against those who want to suppress that voice any way they can. Thanks for watching. I promise I won't do one of these videos again for a little while, but still. Peace and light, that old guy Australia. Like, share, subscribe, hit the notification button, and we'll catch you soon.